Hello BookTube! Today I'm going to do a review of Monkey Beach, and my thumbnail lied. The actual physical copy had to go back to the library a long time ago. The electronic copy that I also got out of the library disappeared off my phone a little while ago, but I, I actually did. I did read the entire book. I just have it all in my head and in my notes, and I'll give it to you from there. So, Monkey Beach is a 2000 book by Eden Robinson, who is actually is from sort of my neck of the woods. She's a native author, born in Kitimat, and I'm just going to read you the synopsis from Goodreads about Monkey Beach because the synopsis people, they're really good at their stuff, and I probably can't do much better. So, 500 miles north of Vancouver is Kitimat, an Indian reservation in the homeland of the Haisla people. Growing up a tough wild tomboy, swimming, fighting, and fishing in a remote village where the land slips into the green ocean on the edge of the world, Lisa Marie has always been different. Visited by ghosts and shapeshifters, tormented by premonitions, she can't escape the sense that something terrible is waiting for her. She recounts her enchanted yet scarred life as she journeys in her speedboat up the frigid waters of the Douglas Channel. She is searching for her brother, dead by drowning, and in her own way, running as fast as she can towards danger. Circling her brother's tragic death are the remarkable characters that make up her family. Lisa Marie's parents, struggling to join their Haisla heritage with Western ways, Uncle Mick, a native rights activist and devoted Elvis fan, and the headstrong Mama U, Haisla for grandmother, a guardian of tradition. And it goes on with a little bit of how this is the, wonderful melding. It's the print copy. So, interesting that the synopsis says uses the word Indian. This big old white guy, am going to be using the word native in my review when I'm referring to people. I know that there are indeed native people who refer to themselves as Indians, but yep, I think I know where I fall on the scale of being big old white guy to being someone who actually grew up in that culture and stuff like that. So I'd like to probably just underline at the beginning here that when they're talking about sort of the culture, the underlying stuff of growing up on an Indian reservation. It's a reservation. This is the history of how Canadian government, Canadian people have treated its native peoples by shoving them onto reservations. All the colonialism. Most definitely, there's references to earlier generations of how of his, like the uncle and an aunt, and how they were sent away to residential schools, which were basically, that's the goal of the Canadian government at the time, was to kill the Indian and thus turn them into good Canadian citizens. What they ended up doing was really horribly destroying the culture. A lot of sexual abuse, a lot of physical abuse happened in these things, much less just basically all the cultural genocide of just trying to destroy these people's culture and not leaving them with no supports. So, that said, this is Lisa Marie, who is actually someone who is seems to be like as her creator. It's sort of about my generation. Robinson was born in 1968, and you get the sense that Lisa Marie, Lisa, as she's mostly referred to in the book, is of this next generation. Has parents, has uncles and aunts, and folks who were and went through the residential school thing, but are now kind of going their own, are growing up on this reservation. And this book does a really good job of as Lisa kind of looks back on her life, of reliving kind of her childhood, of giving you the complexities, the beauties. What's great about this book, I think, is definitely the setting. This coastal BC is somewhere that I'm very familiar with, a little bit further down, but just kind of capturing the feel, just being out on the water, just the denseness of the woods, just a really good job of getting that. Next thing you have to say about this book is the characters. Uncle Mick, Mama U, probably some of my favorites from then. They're definitely in the past retrospective of Lisa looking back on her life. Lisa is probably the present, seems to be about like 1989, and she's like 1920s, somewhere in there. looking back on her life growing up as a kid, and adoring her Uncle Mick, who's obviously someone who has been damaged and has chosen to do be an activist. Um, Things haven't been going great for him, but you feel the devotion, and also with her grandma, her Mama U, and just the humor. There's that humor that I think that you get from people who have like really freaking hard lives, but are such strong, and can be such strong people that while there's alcoholism and lots of really bad stuff happening within this family, that quite rightly can be a lot of it can be traced back to the very shameful history of Canada. Just the humor and the vitality of their lives really comes through, and of their traditions. So it's and I think this is the thing is my favorite part of this book has got to be just like this is like a childhood. This is very much I don't know if this is a YA novel or not. It's told in the first person. Big large hunks of it are about Lisa growing up, and it has that very kind of a YA feel. There's even a little bit of a sort of a the romance, a little bit of a love triangle, which worked less well for me. But I'm a middle-aged guy, so it's probably not going to be as much as something that's going to draw me in as much as I'm going to notice. Oh, we're going into those conventions a little bit here, but then we go off to other stuff. And so and just capturing the kind of the sense of that small community and growing up in nature, which I grew up in the interior of BC in Kelowna, and my favorite thing was to just you just leave the house at the start of the day and just go into the woods and just walk and walk and walk, and I kind of captured some of that. That's how I could, as someone who's grew up in very different circumstances, could kind of really connected to this book. What's not so great about the book sort of centers around her brother Jimmy, and him having gone away with this fellow in a fishing boat, and the synopsis says, oh, he's dead. It's like that's not really totally clear, though you do get the sense of it's a fishing boat. It's not, something's happened with a fishing boat out in the water. If you don't hear something really soon, it's very unlikely. But the thing with that is it centers around Jimmy, and you don't actually get to see Jimmy until it shies away from him, and it's like you go through like she's recalling all her kind of her childhood, and you don't really get to hear about Jimmy until like 2/3 of the way through the book, where you really get a kind of a sit down and you get to know Jimmy. Before that, it's everything else, and you're sort of like, well, why are we so concerned about Jimmy then? Or like, I had a hard time kind of caring about him, and it seemed like very late in the day that you finally get to Jimmy. And as the book comes to its conclusion, you realize that maybe the reason why we didn't get to Jimmy earlier was for more of a narrative surprise reasons. She wanted to shy away from certain details because she didn't want to tip the reader off to certain revelations that happen later in the book. Which I have to say, if that was the case, even bearing them so Jimmy and his girlfriend sort of so far into the book, it wasn't a surprise at the end. It wasn't a revelation. If it was supposed to be a revelation, it is the final payoff of what happens does concern Jimmy and his girlfriend, Karaoke. I can't remember what her actual name was. They call her Karaoke. And yeah, so that didn't particularly work for me. Other things with the book, it's a first person narrative. It's all Lisa, but we stop when we get all these kind of info dumps. There's one where they're talking about Ulican at the first, and I'm like, they're saying like, we put it on this, that, but it's sort of an acquired taste, and I'm laughing at this point because like I know Ulican, I've heard how Ulican is made, and then I flip the page and here's a whole big hunk of well, not big, but there's a good hunk of paragraph there, which is, and here's how Ulican is made, and it was like, oh, you're going to tell us. Okay. And it's interesting, like, okay, someone telling their story would suddenly say, oh, let me tell you what Ulican is, or, oh, let me tell you about these berries, or, oh, let me tell you about heart disease. And I know it was used as a kind of a storytelling device. Is like, here, I'm gonna hook stuff onto it, but just as the conceit of a first person narrative telling you about stuff and saying, oh, I'm going to suddenly stop in the middle of my personal story and suddenly give you little mini essays. It didn't feel very organic to the story, I guess. And then here I might as well go into my two major complaints, which I think might be kind of considered, I don't know, you pay your money, you get what you want, what you get in the thing. This is a literary novel. So we're going to have someone as an adult, just barely an adult. That's an interesting thing of like someone who's 19 or 20 looking back on their childhood. And so we're going to bounce back between times. And it's sort of a literary device of, oh, we're going to, here we're going to have reflections on what happened in the past and how, and then at the very end, oh, they're going to unite together to give you some kind of epiphany. And I guess that's just sort of a literary device. It felt like it kind of slowed down the book for me. There's a part of me that thought, her at 19 wasn't that much different than her to me as an old dude. I guess it's like 19 and 13 aren't as significantly different as if she'd been like more middle-aged and been looking back at being a kid. Of course, I'd say middle-aged, but someone with a bit of a greater distance would have a kind of have a different. There'd be more of a justification for having this. For what it was, it seemed like a way of making a mystery plot, a what happened plot. But it just sort of served to sort of slow down the story for me. It took me a while to read this book, and I wonder if a part of it is just that structure of, oh, we're going back to the present. I'm more interested in the past. Okay, I'll get through the present stuff to get to the past. And then it's only at the very end where, okay, suddenly we're going to hook the two in together, that I was able to kind of read through a little bit more quickly. The other thing is, what I would call, okay, it's what would be, I guess, is native spirituality, which as I guess a literary device is magic realism. And I'm just going to call it magic realism because I'm an atheist. I think Christian stuff in books of visions of angels or things like that, I would call that magic realism in a literary book, and I'd call it fantasy and anything else. It's all fantasy. So yeah, I'm looking at it from that perspective. And bad fantasy books use magic to resolve their stories instead of using character. And especially in a book that's got such strong characters as this one, I was expecting a character-based conclusion. And instead, the conclusion to me is very magic-based. And you could argue that, oh, Lisa's presented as potentially maybe just mentally ill in this book. Her parents take her in to see a psychiatrist, or probably a psychiatrist, someone who probably can give her drugs, a psychiatrist. But the thing is, Lisa has all these visions, she has all these portents of doom and all that, and they're basically all proved to be true as you go out throughout the story. And indeed, her final vision is the conclusion of the book. And if she's mentally ill, well then, wow, this is even more depressing of an end of a book than you could maybe initially think. So, and indeed, I won't. It also does one of the one things that I sort of dislike at the end of books of choose your own adventure endings of like, oh, did this happen at the end, or oh, did this happen at the end? What's the fate of the character at the end? And of course, I'm negative, so definitely the negative thing happened, and that was it. And that was the end of the story. And boy, that wasn't. that wasn't satisfying. But even if you kind of believe in the magic, the spirituality of the book, the made up spirituality, because it's a made up story, she's used it as the conclusion to the book versus what I felt would be something more meaningful of Lisa realizing stuff about herself, I guess. So I really enjoyed the book. I really enjoyed the setting. I enjoyed the characters and all that. But ultimately, at the end, I was very dissatisfied with how the book ended up. And I have some issues with the structure. So yeah, it was definitely a mixed bag for me. And I've probably been yakking on forever and ever. But, it's one of these, she's just come out with a book, which apparently is a humorous a story or something like that that was based on a short story that took her 8 years to write because it turned into a novel. So I'm definitely going to be looking for that next. What the next thing I'll probably pick up with her to just see how she's done. Monkey Beach is her first novel, and it's got the first novel problems. Not that I'm an expert on that, but it felt like first novel problems. So I'm interested to see what happens. Maybe she'll double down on the magic is going to solve everything spirituality thing. Maybe maybe someone will correct me and let me know how this was a character based ending. I'm definitely open to other interpretations of the book from my own confused meanderings. But I've probably been yakking on forever, so I'm going to stop and breathe. Okay, good. More videos later.